History remembers kings, warriors, and conquerors, men who shaped the fate of nations through battle and diplomacy. But behind many thrones, in the shadows of power, stood women whose ambitions knew no limits. Women who ruled not just with strategy, but with terror. These were not ordinary queens. They did not merely govern. They orchestrated deception, murder, and destruction to secure their place in history. Their legacies are not of grace or wisdom, but of bloodshed and ruthless ambition. Today we unveil the chilling tales of three of the most ruthless women in history, women who wielded power with such cruelty that their names became eternal warnings. Their actions shook entire kingdoms, defied divine law, and ultimately led to their own horrifying downfalls. One queen, in her desperate thirst for control, slaughtered her own grandchildren, her own flesh and blood, to keep her grip on the throne. Another, driven by hatred and vengeance, manipulated a powerful ruler into ordering the execution of a prophet, silencing the voice that condemned her sins. And one queen defied not just kings, but the God of Israel himself, unleashing an era of wickedness that invited a divine punishment so gruesome, so unthinkable, that it still horrifies us today. Who were these women? What drove them to such terrifying extremes, and how did their reigns of terror come to an end? Stay with us as we uncover the dark legacies of these evil queens. Women whose names became synonymous with betrayal, vengeance, and divine justice. As we dive deeper into the ancient stories of these wicked queens, join hands with us to say no to all forms of evil across the world by hitting the like, share, and subscribe button. This way the message will reach a wider audience, positively transforming more lives. Power is intoxicating. For those who crave it, no price is too high. Not morality, not family, not even the favor of God. Now let's step into the dark reign of the queen who defied God and paid the ultimate price. Jezebel, the queen who defied God. Jezebel was born into power. As the daughter of King Baal of Tyre, she belonged to a kingdom that dominated the seas, controlling vast trade networks that brought unimaginable wealth. But wealth alone was not enough. Phoenicia was also a land of powerful gods, chief among them Baal, the storm deity, who was believed to control fertility, rain, and harvests. Unlike Israelite queens who often played secondary roles to their husbands, Jezebel was a queen in her own right. When she married King Ahab of Israel, it was not just a political alliance, it was a clash of cultures, beliefs, and power. With her, Jezebel brought not only her gods, but her ruthless determination to reshape Israel in her own image. Jezebel was not just an outsider queen. She was a force of transformation, and her arrival in Israel marked a turning point in the nation's spiritual history. Unlike the Israelite queens before her, who played mostly ceremonial roles, Jezebel was an active ruler, a queen who did not merely influence policy, but shaped the very soul of the kingdom. She did not see Yahweh, the God of Israel, as supreme, nor did she acknowledge Israel's covenant with him. Instead, she brought her own gods, ones that had ruled her homeland of Phoenicia for generations. And with her she brought an unshakable determination to impose their worship upon Israel. Jezebel transformed Israel's capital, Samaria, into a stronghold of Baal worship. She commissioned grand temples to Baal, ensuring that his image towered over the people just as Yahweh's temple stood in Jerusalem. She imported hundreds of Phoenician priests and priestesses, embedding her homeland's pagan religion into Israelite society. She appointed 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, giving them resources, influence, and even seats of power within the kingdom. But these were not just religious figures, they were political enforcers. Their duty was not only to lead rituals, but to silence those who resisted. Jezebel's religious reforms came at a great moral and spiritual cost. Baal worship was not just about prayers and offerings. It was a corrupt and debased system that involved human sacrifices, including the burning of infants as offerings to Baal in exchange for prosperity and blessings. ritual prostitution, where men and women engaged in sacred sexual acts in temple shrines, believing it would bring fertility to the land. Idol worship, where statues of Baal and Asherah were venerated as divine beings, replacing the worship of Yahweh. These practices were direct violations of the laws of Israel, which strictly forbade idolatry and condemned any acts of human sacrifice or ritual perversion. Jezebel did not merely promote Baal worship. She sought to eradicate Yahweh's followers entirely. She declared open war on Israel's prophets, the very men who had guided the nation with divine wisdom for generations. She ordered mass executions, sending soldiers across Israel to hunt down Yahweh's prophets and silence their voices. Many prophets were captured and slaughtered, their blood staining the streets as an example to anyone who would dare oppose her. The faithful who survived were forced into hiding, gathering in secret caves, whispering prayers in the darkness, clinging to their faith despite the reign of terror. Yet, despite her merciless purge, one man refused to be silenced: Elijah, the prophet of Yahweh. Elijah was a lone figure in a kingdom consumed by darkness, a prophet who stood against Jezebel's tyranny and dared to proclaim Yahweh's judgment. He went into hiding, sustained by ravens that brought him food in the wilderness, a miraculous sign that Yahweh had not abandoned his people. But Elijah was not content with survival. He would return to confront Jezebel's prophets head-on. Jezebel believed she had won, that Baal's reign was secured, and that Yahweh's name would be forgotten. But she underestimated the power of the God she defied. Jezebel's hunger for power was insatiable. She had already reshaped the spiritual landscape of Israel, replacing the worship of Yahweh with the dark rituals of Baal. But her ruthlessness extended beyond religion. She wielded deception, manipulation, and murder as weapons to secure whatever she or her husband desired. One of the most infamous acts of cruelty in her reign was the betrayal and murder of a righteous man named Naboth, an incident that would seal her fate forever. King Ahab, though ruler of Israel, was not a strong man. He was weak-willed and easily manipulated, especially by Jezebel. One day, as he walked near his palace in Jezreel, his eyes fell upon a vineyard, Naboth's vineyard. The vineyard was not just a plot of land. It was prime real estate, positioned next to the royal palace. Ahab envisioned turning it into a vegetable garden, something convenient, something suited to his desires. He approached Naboth with what seemed like a reasonable request: "Sell me your vineyard or let me trade it for another. I will pay you handsomely." But Naboth refused. According to Israelite law, land was not just property, it was an ancestral inheritance, a divine gift passed down from generation to generation. Selling it was forbidden, for it meant breaking the sacred covenant that tied Israel's people to the land God had given them. Ahab was shocked and humiliated. Jezebel, ever the calculating and cold-hearted strategist, noticed her husband's gloom. "Why is your spirit so troubled that you refuse to eat?" Ahab, petulant and weak, whines about Naboth's rejection. That was all Jezebel needed to hear. To her, this was not a dilemma, it was an insult. What kind of king allows a mere commoner to refuse him? And more importantly, what kind of queen allows her husband to be denied? Her response was chilling. "Are you not the king of Israel? Get up, eat, and be cheerful. I will get you the vineyard of Naboth." Jezebel set her plan into motion without hesitation. She forged letters in Ahab's name, using the royal seal to give them unquestionable authority. She sent these letters to the elders and nobles of Jezreel, ordering them to arrange a public gathering and set Naboth at the center. But there was a sinister twist. She commanded that 2 false witnesses be brought forward to accuse Naboth of cursing both God and the king. "This man has blasphemed against God and the king." The accusation was a lie, but a deadly one. In Israel, blasphemy and treason were punishable by death. The people, stirred by the false testimony, turned against Naboth. Without a trial, without a defense, Naboth was dragged into the streets and stoned to death. Jezebel smiles, her satisfaction evident. The land was now free for the taking. She coldly informs Ahab, "Go, take possession of Naboth's vineyard, for he is dead." And just like that, a man's life was erased for the sake of a piece of land. As Ahab stands in Naboth's vineyard, Elijah appears before him, unshaken, unafraid. And he speaks words that will haunt Jezebel for the rest of her life. "Thus says the Lord, have you murdered and also taken possession? In the place where dogs lick the blood of Naboth, dogs shall lick your own blood." And then the prophecy against Jezebel herself. "The dogs shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel." Jezebel thought she had won, but God's justice never fails, and her day of reckoning was coming. Years passed. King Ahab died in battle and the kingdom fell into turmoil. A new leader, Jehu, a fierce warrior, rose to power, determined to cleanse Israel of Jezebel's influence. As Jehu rode into Jezreel, Jezebel knew her time had come, but she did not flee. Instead, in one final act of defiance, she painted her face, adorned herself in royal robes, and stood at her palace window, looking down at Jehu. With calm arrogance, she mocked him. "Is it peace, you Zimri, murderer of your master?" A reference to a previous usurper meant to taunt Jehu about his own fate. But Jehu was unfazed. He called out to her servants, "Who is on my side? Who?" 2 or 3 eunuchs appeared at the window. Without hesitation, they seized their queen and threw her from the palace window. Moments later, Jehu's chariot trampled over her body as he entered the palace. When soldiers went to retrieve her corpse, they found a gruesome sight. Wild dogs had devoured her flesh, leaving only her skull, hands, and feet, just as Elijah had prophesied. Jezebel's story is a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition, deception, and defiance against divine authority. She had wealth, power, and influence, but she used them for evil, persecuting the righteous and leading a nation into corruption. Her reign seemed untouchable, but in the end she met a fate more gruesome than she could have ever imagined. No matter how powerful a person may seem, justice, whether divine or earthly, always catches up with those who wield power without morality. Her name, once spoken with reverence in the halls of Tyre, became a symbol of wickedness that echoes through history. Jezebel's story is a chilling reminder that no amount of power, deception, or cruelty can outrun divine justice. She ruled with an iron grip, silencing those who opposed her and spreading corruption throughout Israel. But in the end, her fate was sealed, just as the prophet Elijah foretold. Yet Jezebel's legacy of ruthless ambition did not die with her. Her bloodline carried on her cunning and cruelty, and from her own family emerged another queen whose thirst for power led her to commit an even more horrifying act, slaughtering her own grandchildren to secure her throne. Now we turn to the story of the queen who bathed her own dynasty in blood. Athaliah, the queen who slaughtered her family. Athaliah was Jezebel's daughter, and like her infamous mother, she was ruthless, cunning, and consumed by ambition. She married Jehoram, the king of Judah, uniting the royal families of Israel and Judah, but more importantly, spreading her mother's influence into another kingdom. Their son, Ahaziah, ascended the throne after Jehoram's death, but his rule was short-lived, and what followed would be one of the darkest chapters in Judah's history. Ahaziah was not a strong king. He was young, easily influenced, and more a puppet than a ruler. He followed the corrupt ways of his grandfather Ahab and his mother Athaliah, continuing the worship of Baal in Judah. His alliances with Israel's wicked dynasty led him into a battle that was never meant to be his. Ahaziah's downfall came when he joined his uncle, King Joram of Israel, in battle against Jehu, the military commander whom God had chosen to bring judgment upon Ahab's lineage. Jehu's rebellion was swift and merciless. As Jehu rode into Jezreel, he assassinated King Joram with a single arrow, ending the house of Ahab in Israel. Ahaziah, realizing the horror unfolding before him, fled for his life. But there was no escape. He was captured near Megiddo and put to death. His lifeless body was returned to Jerusalem, where he was buried with his ancestors. Most mothers would collapse in grief at the loss of a son. Most mothers would weep at the tragic fate of their child. But Athaliah was no ordinary mother. Ahaziah's death was not a tragedy to her, it was an opportunity. For years she had held power as queen mother, but she was still second in command. Now, with Ahaziah gone, she saw a chance to rule Judah without limitations. But there was one problem, one obstacle that stood in her way: Ahaziah's sons, her own grandsons, the rightful heirs to the throne. As long as any of them lived, her grip on power was not secure. Her solution? Eliminate them all. Athaliah ordered the unthinkable. She commanded the slaughter of her own grandchildren, any child who could claim David's throne. One by one, the innocent heirs were dragged from their beds and executed. No mercy, no hesitation, no guilt. The house of David was nearly wiped out in a single night, but God had a different plan. Jezebel, Ahaziah's sister and the wife of the high priest Jehoiada, defied Athaliah's orders. She rescued the infant Joash and hid him inside the temple of Yahweh, the one place Athaliah would never dare to enter. For 6 years, while Athaliah believed she had destroyed every rival, the true heir to Judah's throne was growing in secret, under divine protection. For 6 years, Athaliah ruled Judah with an iron grip. She was the only queen to rule Judah in her own right, but she did so with cruelty and oppression. She continued her mother's legacy, promoting Baal worship and driving Judah deeper into spiritual darkness. The temple of Yahweh was neglected, and the altars of Baal flourished across the land. But Athaliah did not know that her time was running out. What Athaliah could not see, what she could not control, was that the true king still lived, and soon the people of Judah would rise against her. For 6 years, Judah had suffered under Athaliah's ruthless rule. For 6 years, the people believed the royal bloodline was extinct. For 6 years, a secret had been hidden within the sacred walls of the temple: Joash, the last surviving heir of David's line. Jehoiada had waited long enough. He gathered his most trusted warriors, temple guards loyal to Yahweh and the house of David. He swore them to secrecy, revealing to them what no one else in the kingdom knew: Joash was alive. The priests brought out Joash, now a 7-year-old boy, unaware of the weight of the moment, but standing with quiet strength. Then the trumpets sounded. The doors of the temple swung open. The people gathered, their whispers turning to gasps, then to cheers. And when they saw the child king standing before them, clothed in royal garments, they erupted in a single cry: "Long live the king!" Athaliah sprang to her feet, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. She had killed them all, hadn't she? And there he was, Joash alive, crowned, standing beside Jehoiada, the people cheering not for her, but for the rightful king. The temple guards, armed, no longer under her command. Everything she had killed to prevent had unfolded before her eyes. She screamed, her voice slicing through the celebration like a dagger. "Treason! Treason!" Athaliah had ruled through fear, murder, and betrayal, but now she stood alone. The people, once too afraid to oppose her, now shouted in defiance. The guards, who once carried out her orders without question, now turned toward her, their swords ready, not to protect, but to strike. She had spilled royal blood to seize power. Now her own blood would be spilled in return. The guards seized Athaliah. She thrashed, cursed, and screamed, but no one came to her aid. She was dragged from the temple, the sacred place she had desecrated, and taken to the very gates of the palace she had stolen. With one final strike, the queen who murdered her family for power fell. Athaliah's reign ended as violently as it began. She had ruled by the sword, and perished by the sword. The line of David had survived, Yahweh had kept his promise, and Judah was free once more. Athaliah's story is one of the most chilling tales of power and betrayal in history. She sought the throne at any cost, even if it meant killing her own blood. She ruled without mercy, believing herself untouchable. But justice cannot be silenced forever. No matter how deeply evil takes root, no matter how much blood is shed to keep power, the truth will rise, justice will prevail, and the wicked will fall. But Athaliah wasn't the only woman whose ambition led her to destruction. Next, we uncover the story of another queen, one who used manipulation and seduction to bring about the execution of one of the most revered prophets in history. Stay with us as we dive into the story, the queen who demanded a prophet's head on a platter. Herodias, the queen who demanded a prophet's head. Herodias was born into the infamous Herodian dynasty, a ruling family known not just for its wealth and influence, but for its betrayals, assassinations, and ruthless thirst for power. She was first married to Herod Philip, her own uncle, a marriage that gave her status but little political power. However, she was not content with being just a wife. She craved greater authority. She abandoned Philip and married his brother, Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, in what was both an incestuous and adulterous union. This scandalous marriage shocked the people of Judea, but no one condemned it louder than John the Baptist. John was a prophet unlike any other, a man of the wilderness, dressed in camel's hair, living on locusts and honey. His message was simple but unyielding: repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. He spoke the truth without fear, rebuking sinners regardless of their status, even kings. He baptized the repentant in the Jordan River, preparing the way for the Messiah. People flocked to him, sensing that he was no ordinary man. He was a voice crying in the wilderness, calling for righteousness. But his boldness would make him a dangerous enemy to those who thrived in sin and corruption. Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, had taken Herodias as his wife, but she was already married to his own brother, Herod Philip. Their union was not just scandalous, it was unlawful under God's law. Levitical law forbade a man from marrying his brother's wife, especially while the brother was still alive. It was adultery, it was incest, it was an offense before God. And John was not one to turn a blind eye. It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. His words shook the people. Even the palace walls could not keep out the righteous fury of his rebuke. Herod Antipas hesitated. He feared John, recognizing him as a man of God, and he knew the people regarded him as a prophet. Herodias, however, was enraged. To her, this was not just an insult. It was a direct attack on her power and position. Herodias was not just offended, she was humiliated. John had not only exposed her sin, he had made a spectacle of it before the people. Her marriage had been questioned, her authority mocked. People whispered, emboldened by John's words, daring to criticize their queen, and worst of all, Herod did nothing to silence him. She wanted John dead. But Herod was hesitant. He feared John's divine favor. He knew the people revered him, and killing him could spark a revolt. So he settled for a compromise. He had John arrested and thrown into the dark, damp prison of Machaerus fortress. But she knew she had to bide her time, so she waited, plotted. And then an opportunity arose, a night of celebration, a reckless vow, and a dance that would seal John's fate. Herod Antipas, reclining on his lavish throne, watches as nobles, military leaders, and the elite of Galilee revel in the celebration. The night is intoxicating, a blur of rich food, flowing wine, and boastful conversations. Herod, already deep in his cups, is feeling bold. He enjoys the admiration of his guests, basking in his own authority. Herodias sits beside him, eyes sharp, lips curling into the faintest smirk. She knows that tonight an opportunity will arise. Salome, the daughter of Herodias, enters the room. She moves with grace and precision, her every step mesmerizing. The guests murmur in admiration, drawn into the rhythm of her movements. Herod leans forward enraptured, his eyes never leaving her. The performance is more than just entertainment. It is a carefully woven spell, one that wraps itself around Herod, lowering his defenses, clouding his judgment. And then, when the dance ends, Herod rises, flushed and enthralled. His voice rings out, loud and triumphant. "Ask me for anything you want, and I will give it to you, even up to half my kingdom." Salome stands still for a moment, then slowly turns to her mother. This is the moment she has been waiting for. She leans in, whispering into her daughter's ear, "Give me the head of John the Baptist on a platter." Herod's smile vanishes. His drunken haze clears in an instant. This is not what he expected. He glances at Herodias, his mind racing. Did she plan this? Has he just sealed the fate of a prophet? But the room is watching him now. The nobles wait for his response. The military commanders eye him curiously. The servants barely breathe, sensing the shift in the air. He cannot take back his oath. To do so would be a public humiliation. And Herodias knows this. With a heavy heart and a reluctant nod, Herod utters the words that will send an innocent man to his death. "Let it be done." And so, with one rash promise, one manipulative whisper, and one fateful dance, John the Baptist's execution was set in motion. He had never intended for this. He had feared John, had respected him as a holy man, even though he had imprisoned him at Herodias' insistence. He knew that executing John would be a grave mistake. The people revered him, and the backlash could be dangerous. But the trap had already been set. To go back on his word now, before his nobles, military commanders, and influential guests, would be a public disgrace. He had made a foolish oath, and now he had to honor it. With a slow, heavy breath, Herod gave the order. John the Baptist, kneeling in prayer, looks up. His face is calm, unshaken, unafraid. He has known this moment would come. He does not beg, he does not plead, he does not curse his enemies. Instead, he meets the guard's gaze and nods, his faith unwavering, his soul at peace. The executioner unsheaths his sword. It is done. Moments later, John's severed head is placed on a silver platter. The executioner lifts it carefully, the prophet's lifeless eyes still open. The weight of the moment is unbearable, and yet, for the men carrying out the order, it is simply another task, another command to be fulfilled. The feast has resumed, but an uneasy tension lingers. Then the doors swing open. The executioner steps inside, the platter balanced in his hands. A collective gasp ripples through the room. The guests look away, horrified. The nobles shift uncomfortably in their seats. Even Herod, despite having given the order, cannot bring himself to look directly at the gruesome sight. But Salome does not flinch. She steps forward, her expression unreadable, and takes the platter into her own hands. Slowly, she turns and carries it to her mother. The moment has come. The man who dared to defy her, who exposed her sin, who shamed her before all of Judea, is no more. Salome sets the platter before her mother. Herodias leans forward, her eyes narrowing as she takes in the sight of John's severed head. For a moment she simply stares. Then, slowly, a smile spreads across her lips. The prophet is dead. She has won. Or so she thinks. Herodias got what she wanted, but at what cost? John's execution did not erase his words. His message continued to spread. Herod Antipas was haunted by guilt, and when he later heard of Jesus' miracles, he feared John had risen from the dead. Herodias' thirst for power ultimately led to her downfall. Her husband was exiled to a distant land, and she vanished from history, her ambitions crumbling into nothing. Her story stands as a warning. Pride leads to destruction. Vengeance consumes those who seek it. No earthly power can silence the truth forever. Each of these queens sought power at any cost. Jezebel, who tried to erase Yahweh's name from Israel only to be thrown from a window and devoured by dogs. Athaliah, who murdered her own family to claim the throne only to be dragged from the temple and executed. Herodias, who demanded John the Baptist's head, believing she had silenced God's voice, only to face divine judgment that wiped her dynasty from history. For a time they seemed unstoppable, feared, ruthless, victorious, but in the end, their fates were sealed. No throne built on blood, deceit, and rebellion can stand forever. Now, as we reflect on their stories, we are left with a sobering truth. Power may corrupt, but justice never sleeps. Their stories are not just tales of ambition and power, but chilling reminders of the price of wickedness. For a time, these women ruled through terror, believing their power made them untouchable. But history proves a chilling truth. No throne built on blood and betrayal can stand forever. Justice always finds its way. If you found these stories fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe to our channel, Bible Stories That Grow Your Faith, and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into history's most intriguing figures. Until next time, remember, history never forgets.